Encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. I want to thank you for spending your time and joining with us today. We are working on our new 2-hour format, and for the record, you should be aware of that so that you can participate accordingly. The change is due largely because we felt that 1 hour a day was not enough. The ammunition that is being thrown down by the administration on a day-in and day-out basis is so extensive, so broad, so numerous, that we really felt as if we had an opportunity that we didn't want to let a perfectly good crisis go to waste, to use the words of a famous administration slack. And so we've decided that we're going to extend to a 2-hour format, and in light of that, there's a couple of things that you want to know. One, our listen line numbers have changed, and they were changed to allow more folks and more callers on the line simultaneously, so I'd like to give those to you. They are area code 712-432-5399. And again, that's 712-432-5339. The secondary number is area code 213-992-4323. That number is unchanged. That's 213-992-4323. Please make sure that you make a note of those numbers. They will allow more callers simultaneously on the line to listen to the show live at 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. Central. As you know, you can stream every day at americasvoicenow.org. We have changed somewhat the video window so that it would make it a little easier for folks to be able to see the video and participate. So, okay, I want to touch on a couple of issues today. The 4 things that we're going to really address and go over this morning are going to be FATCA. Now that, if you're not familiar with FATCA and what it is, this is a new tax plan that has been implemented that is called the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, and it is forcing Americans in droves to give up their U.S. citizenship. So we're going to address that this morning. The second segment, we're going to address immigration and how that is bearing on us, because the House is now talking as if they are in agreement with the Senate bill and that they're going to pass this. And I got to tell you, it's really time for us to make it clear, abundantly clear to our representatives that we're not accepting of that. The third issue we're going to talk about is surveillance, and that'll be in our third segment, surveillance under the NSA, how everything that we've heard about this is a lie, and the proof is plainly evident for all to see, except for the fact that the Ministry of Propaganda won't properly show it to us. And then a fourth is going to be a discussion related to the recent activism of a 14-year-old GMO activist who placed a video out there and challenged a talk show host to a combat or a battle of wits, which he severely lost. And so we'll address these each as we go forward. I'd like you to just make a note of that. All 4 of these segments will be up on YouTube later today. So please have an opportunity, if you can, or share it with a family member or a friend or whomever you feel is appropriate. And let's get the show off the ground. Okay, let's talk about FATCA first. That is our first project. FATCA is a new law that is out there, which is the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. And here's the problem. FATCA is forcing literally thousands upon thousands of Americans to give up their U.S. citizenship. Now, this was announced in 2009 by Obama at a press conference with a simple premise The plan was to crack down on illegal tax evasion overseas and close loopholes and make it more profitable for companies to create jobs here in the United States. That was the claim. Here's the problem. This is as typical, as usual with government programs, a completely and absolutely botched program. Here's what they're doing. They're using an I-beam to cut butter. And as a result, alienating nations across the planet, and resulting solution that 6 million citizens who live abroad, who are American citizens, are reconsidering whether or not they want to remain American citizens. And so here's the way to look at this. And by the way, this was well written by an article by Colleen Graffy at the Wall Street Journal. It's called How to Lose Friends, Citizens, and Influence. The U.S. Foreign Tax Account Compliance Act seeks to co-opt foreign banks as long-arm enforcement agencies of the IRS. And I've posted this up on our YouTube and our Facebook and website pages. And here's what you have to recognize. And she draws a great analogy. Imagine if you were born in California, but moved to New York for education or work, and fell in love and married and had children. And even though you've faithfully paid taxes in New York, your resident state, and federal taxes, of course, but you haven't lived in California for 25 years, suppose that California then came back and required that you also file taxes there because you were born there. In other words, here's how it works. If you're an American citizen and you live abroad, and you were born here, but you work and permanently reside as an expatriate over in, let's say, France, you are required to not only pay taxes in France, but also now to pay taxes back here in the United States. The premise is that you're an American citizen, and therefore they're trying to eliminate the idea that citizenry can avoid declaring taxation there. And here's the real problem with it. One, they're not doing it to corporations, and that's why there is over $2 trillion overseas that is in the hands of corporations, which is used for investment in those countries, but not paid on here. In other words, they just declared that Apple itself has got some like $52 billion that they are not paying tax on. And so, here they are trying to beat the tar out of average everyday Americans who live abroad, working for companies in many cases, or in most cases. And to make matters worse, what that's really causing is these 6 million Americans who live overseas are now being forced to determine, do we want to give up our citizenship? Because what the foreign banks are saying, if you're going to do this and force us to give you information about American citizens and their bank holdings here, we're just not going to accept bank accounts from anybody with an American passport. Do you see the problem? So, and the real long-term ramifications, the unintended consequence of this, is that we have a massive brain and wealth drain from the United States. In other words, 6 million intelligent, articulate, wealthy, well-read, well-educated patriots or expatriates who are American citizens and for all intents and purposes benefit the United States as an overall group and as unofficial ambassadors of the United States are now giving up their citizenship. Meanwhile, we're allowing millions upon millions upon millions of destitute, uneducated, valueless clods come across our borders so that they can suck up resources from our nation on a day in and day out basis. Do you see the dichotomy here? In other words, we're chasing out the wealthy and the intelligent, and we're opening up the double barn doors on the border for 11.5 million immigrants at official estimates. The real number is actually 25 million, and that doesn't count chain immigration. And we're going to address that in our second segment when we deal with immigration. We're allowing them over the border where they are going to become a drain on our resources and lower our standard of living, lower our education level, and lower and tear apart the fabric and the the weave of our society. Do you see the problem? In other words, why is it that we feel it's appropriate to whack Americans who are living abroad, in many cases have not lived here in decades? Here's an example. There are also individuals, and this was referenced in this article here, that are for all intents and purposes, accidental Americans. These are people who were born here while their parents were visiting here and now went back to their home country. They were never American citizens and never applied to be or wanted to be, but they were de facto citizens because they were born here. And what's happening is we're now telling them they have to pay tax here, even though they've never lived here except for a short 6-month stint while their families were here as a vacation or work, short-term work operation or whatever the case may be. So when we talk about why this is happening, I laud the concept that we're trying to close loopholes. But here's the problem when we use an I-beam to cut butter. It is vastly overhanded, and it is giving us a bad name overseas as a nation. It's destroying the concept that Americans have that they can operate and work overseas and not be double taxed. And because of the fact that these foreign banks and foreign governments don't want to deal with the paperwork, they're actually denying Americans to have accounts in those countries. Now, for the record, you need to understand, this is a process that is practiced only by two nations. One is the United States of America. The second is Eritrea, that hub of commerce, that hub of intelligent, articulate individuals who are world-renowned for their intelligence and their education. Ha ha. Foreign financial institutions who are trying to avoid the requirements, and by the way, they estimated at about $5,000 per individual. $5,000 just to meet the reporting requirements. And banks are saying, hey, listen, we don't want to deal with that. Not to mention the fact that if we make a mistake, we open ourselves up to liability in the international court and in U.S. courts. And we don't want to be accused falsely of fraud, and I don't blame them. You can't blame a foreign bank for saying, look, we're in business to make money and bank, regardless of where you come from. I don't have a problem with the fact that they are trying to track, completely violated money outside the United States. I do have a problem with the way in which they're doing this. And the real challenge here is that they're not doing it against their corporate cronies. You see, if they were doing it and they were applying this to Apple, or they were applying this to GE, the president's favorite boy, who filed a 59,000-page tax refund and didn't pay 1 penny in U.S. taxes, then I'd be more inclined to agree with the principle. But they're applying this, as they always do, to individuals while giving loopholes and waivers to their favorite pals. And that, ladies and gentlemen, shows us that we live in a corporatocracy. That shows us that what we really have here is a betrayal of the citizenry, while the corporations and the cronies of this administration, and others, of course, benefit. Now, this is purely an Obama project. This started in 2009. This was not something that was ever done by any president before. It's the first time it's ever happened here in the United States. And the internet and the voice of Americans overseas, which is kind of promoted by a website called AmericansAbroad.org, is flooded with all kinds of information about this. But what they don't recognize is that the problems that are engendered by this are so numerous that at this point in time, you have to wonder how long they can continue to keep this issue pending. In other words, here's the way you have to look at this. Should there be, as an example, a limitation or a statute of limitations on how long this applies? Should this apply towards everyone, even though they were accidentally born here and therefore denoted with citizenship? Can you sit there and tell the English ambassador who was born here, because his parents were stationed here as ambassadors from England, that he, who's never been an American citizen and never lived here for more than a year or so during his infant years, is now required to file and pay taxes in America. That's an absurdity. No one agrees with that principle. And yet the IRS, in their vigor and quest for revenue, which they then use to target Americans as enemies of this administration, is now seeking to penalize everyone who has ever stepped foot in America as even an accidental citizen. The problem as we have it right now is that when we talk about, the American reputation, we know that this administration has already shredded that. We are looked upon overseas as imperialistic, overbearing monsters. And that is, in all fairness, the truth. We stick our nose in every other nation's business, with or without any credible value or necessity. We constantly tell them how they should act while completely ignoring the realities of whether or not they want our input and help and advice. We are always sticking our nose in someone else's military business, political business. I mean, here we are interfering with what the Egyptians want because we, as a government, and I don't mean we as the American people, our government wants Morsi back. He was handpicked as a Muslim Brotherhood candidate. The problem is that the Egyptian people don't want him. And so we're sitting there supporting a dictator who they've declared in very clear tones that they don't want, and we're supporting him and trying to force their government to reinsert that guy. Hey, listen, that's not our place to do. We're over in Afghanistan where we don't belong and never should have been. We're over in Iraq where we don't belong and never should have been. I mean, how many places, and by the way, those are only the publicized ones, we are operating in some 60 countries around the world that we don't belong, militarily and otherwise. The United States has become an imperial dictatorship, and we are, for all intents and purposes, promulgating that on American citizens now, both here and abroad. When, at what point, does America recognize that we don't have the right to demand that other countries accept what we have? You see, it's the old adage that think of this in religious terms. If someone said to you, I want you to understand the value of this religion because it will save your soul, you have the free will and the right to accept or not accept that. On the other hand, if someone says to you, accept my religious premise and acknowledge it and pledge fealty to it, or I'm going to take a pair of rusty pliers and I'm going to snap your toes off one at a time, you automatically have a negative tone about that religion, and rightly so. If this is going to become the state of inquisition for tax purposes in the United States, then you can't expect other countries to willingly be participants in it, nor can you expect American expatriates to want to participate and play. They have a right to give up their citizenship. The real problem here is by giving up their citizenship, they are, for all intents and purposes, declaring that the United States, for all of the taxes they pay, gives them only one benefit: a blue piece of paper called a passport. And the truth of the matter is, that doesn't get you very far anymore. The ugly American is now not just the individual. It is the way in which our entire nation is being looked upon. And the damage being done to our society, to our nation, to our reputation, overseas and globally, is incalculable. This administration has done more to damage the reputation and the benefit and the value of America as a nation and how we're viewed than all other presidents previously combined, without fail. This president has completely and utterly destroyed the reputation of the American ideal. He has shown us to be frail, to be weak, to be arbitrary, to be capricious, to be overbearing, belligerent, and petulant. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is something that's going to be very, very difficult for us to overcome after this president leaves. Even if Hillary God forbid, becomes president, that is something that we are going to have an enormous amount of difficulty moving past. We cannot have a scenario where the United States of America is looked upon by the world as not only a quarrelsome, troublesome neighbor, but a petulant, spoiled, rotten child who lashes out and has great power and strength. That, ladies and gentlemen, is where we stand. We are not only tyrannizing America domestically, we are terrorizing and tyrannizing the world. And I don't know where this administration believes that they have the right to accomplish that. I suspect that there will be no changes made to this, that foreign nations will be further imposed upon, and will ultimately, for all intents and purposes, declare Americans who live abroad as persona non grata, not welcome here. And that is a tragedy for all of America. Those who do give up their citizenship, and they are, by the way, the number has grown 800%. Did you hear that number, folks? 800%. The numbers are so staggering that at this point you have to wonder exactly how deep down the rabbit hole they want to take this. The numbers in last year were like 180, and this year they have gone up by 800% to 1,169 people. And that's only in the first period, this first half. So the real challenge here is, as we talk about the challenge imposed upon Americans and foreign nations, what we're dealing with is the uncomfortable scenario that will force Americans to be considered not welcome in foreign nations. And it's one thing to make America look like a petulant, spoiled child by other nations' heads. It's another thing when Americans are going to be disenfranchised just by virtue of their connection back to the tyrant. I present the idea that this should be stopped and eliminated or clarified to include corporations and only corporations and not individuals. The other alternative, of course, is to say that if you are a permanent resident of the United States and you keep accounts overseas, that then again would be a completely different story. And I'm wide open to the idea that says that Steve Jobs, as an example, can't live here but keep a $25 or $35 million account overseas. I'm 100% in agreement with that principle. But penalizing normal Americans who are just trying to do their day in and day out banking, that I am not in agreement with, and I don't think you should be either. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to address our second issue, which is immigration. Now, if you're not aware and you're not participating in where we stand right now on this immigration issue, you need to be. We're going to take it in depth, and we're going to figure out exactly what we need to do to send the message to Congress that any immigration change will be considered here to be treasonous if they agree with any part of the Senate project, which declares that all of these illegals get an instant amnesty. There can be no amnesty and there can be no activity here in the United States without a complete sealing of all American borders. We'll be back in just a moment.